This is Tanyan Walker. I'm one of the employment support specialists here at Seed. Thank you all for joining us. We are live here. We're at Owens Place. Oh,
It's not working.
oh no, it just hit me with something different. It's a pop up. This is my first time going live, so we got a lot of pop ups. Um, thank you all. We have a amazing guest here today in our career pathway series. I'm going to go ahead and pass it to him, and we'll start there.
Hello, everyone. My name is D'Angelo Rag, and I'm a licensed funeral director and embalmer. I currently work with as a contractor with Serenity Funeral Home. So I'm going to talk about being a funeral director. Some of the things that we have to do as a funeral director, one of the things I have to do as a task is I have to go to school. So I went to MATC for mortuary science or funeral services at the time. The program was 2 years. When the program was 2 years, and then you had to do a 1 year apprenticeship. So in the process of that, I did classroom work, and then we would have to actually go and work at a funeral home and work on the deceased persons and work with the families to gain the credit that we needed in order to take the exams. I had to take 2 exams. I took a national exam. The national exam allowed me to be able to go to anywhere in the United States and its territories to receive employment. I also had to take each individual state exam. The state exams goes over to like regulations and licensing, whereas the national or international exam goes over coursework that you learned in school, such as anatomy and physiology, microbiology. You learn the history of funeral services. You learn how to do restorative art. And then there's like business courses, and there's also law classes that you have to learn for the exams. Once you successfully pass the exams, then you become licensed. So I'm a licensed funeral director in the state of Wisconsin and Indiana and also Mississippi. I've been doing this now for about 14 to maybe 14 years, or since 2004. So that's about 17 years. And it's been a great career. I like it. I really enjoy it. Some of the things that I experienced on the journey is I was young when I got into the career. There was a lot of older individuals that was in the business. So I had to maneuver my way through there, because sometimes when you're young, you're pretty ambitious. You have a lot of goals and things, and you share that with other people. Sometimes that can work to your benefit, and sometimes it cannot work to your benefit. It worked in my favor for the most part. I had the opportunity to also work for Krause Funeral Homes and Serenity Funeral Homes, and I also worked under the late great Arthur Reed at Reed's Ngoti Gay Funeral Home. Those guys taught me that sometimes when you are working in this business, it's a hard business, but you have to train other people to do the work. While training other people to do the work, you have to be conscious that they may be better than you. So you have to have an attitude that no matter what you do, you can be a conqueror, but you also have to have an attitude that you have to help someone else. If I help you become a better person, and then you take those skills and go work in the workplace as a funeral director or an embalmer, then you share my skills with other families and other owners, and we all have an opportunity to serve the family in a better way because our skills are developed. So I have skills, like I said, I worked under Arthur Reed, I worked with Mark Krause, I worked with Marilyn Baldwin, and those 3 individuals were very good people in the business. They were are good people in the business. They were very family oriented. They wanted to make sure that the service needs of the families was taken care of, and they just wanted to make sure that their loved ones, the deceased, have the best experience when going through planning a funeral. Sometimes when you are at the funeral home, you meet families that it may be their first time working with funeral home burying their loved one. And then some other times there may be families that may have a rapport with the funeral home, and it's repeat opportunity for the funeral home to serve the families. But I want to talk about what we do in the day as a funeral director. So it may be around 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the morning. We'll get a phone call from a family saying that their loved one has passed on. So we'll go as a team. I would normally work with an apprentice. The apprentice works alongside of me. So we will go there, we'll make what is called a transfer or a removal. After a transfer or removal, we will go there and then talk with the family or friends if they are there. If no one's there, we'll pick up the deceased person, we'll bring them back to the funeral home. Once the deceased person is at the funeral home, we will take them into the prep room. The prep room is where they are embalmed, where the restorative art or the cosmetology goes on. And then there's an area also where they're dressed and casketed. You have a question?
No, you just said cosmetologist.
All right, a cosmetologist. And then, so we bring them there, the cosmetologist in this room, and then we'll dress them there. And then also the casket will be delivered at a later point. And in this room, this is where the deceased will get dressed and be prepared for public presentation. Prior to that process, you have to have an arrangement conference with the loved ones that are still living. You make an arrangement, they come in, you have a arrangement conference, you talk about the different things pertaining to the funeral, such as the service locations and times when they would like to have the services as far as the dates and times. You'll talk about the deceased's biographical information. So you'll learn about them, you'll learn where they last lived, what their career choices was in life, where they may have passed away, if they have surviving relatives. This information can be used to develop or to produce an obituary that would be used at the funeral. So once the arrangement process is over with, I, as the funeral director, would then begin to make phone calls to different vendors. Some of the vendors that we have to work with as far as the funeral home goes would be the cemetery, flowers, the casket provider, and we have to get ministers and musicians. And then we also work with other persons in the community. So once the funeral is arranged, we do the arrangement conference, we set the funeral up, set a date and time, then we go on the funeral. Once on the funeral, when we are on the funeral, sometimes families have like a visitation the night before. They'll come in, see their loved ones, spend time with them. Other family members will come in and give memorials or tributes. And then the next day they'll have a service. It may go on for about an hour, hour and a half. All the loved ones will come. There will be more of a formal service. They will have a pastor that would normally do like a eulogy over the deceased person. At the end of the service, there will be what's called a rites of passage, where you will take the loved one to the cemetery, and then you will give them a final burial rite. Once the loved one is at the cemetery, we will secure them with the cemetery officials. They will make sure that they are buried properly. We as funeral directors have to wait until the deceased person is buried or lowered into the ground as part of our role towards the family. And then, so that's kind of pretty much what goes on at need when a deceased person passes away. But then the most important, or the next important portion, is called aftercare. And aftercare is when you call and you continue to build a relationship with the family. The family may have different things or business that needs to be taken care of, because the deceased person may be the one that actually handled all the business for the household. So in the aftercare process, that's when we learn if there's other individuals that may need life insurance, if there may need death certificates or any business that need to be conducted on behalf of the deceased person. One of the things that I personally used to do when I worked with families and did arrangements is I always got the person who I was arranging the funeral, I got their birthday. And then on either the birthday or on their birthday or on the anniversary date of the deceased person's death, I will always send out a card, just letting them know that we're thinking about them, and thanking them also to let them know that we're here for them if they need any of our services. When you're working as a funeral director, not all the time you can do everything in-house. sometimes you go outside of the house or outside of the funeral home to get connections. And what I mean by that is you may have to work with a local florist. Oftentimes, the deceased person, if it's a man or if it's a woman, they may have their own barber or cosmetologist, and they'll like them to come in and do their makeup, do their hair. Sometimes I work with a barber that comes in, and all the deceased persons, we call it casket sharp. So that is, it's just the deceased person is gonna be in the presentation, or the presentation is gonna be extremely crispy, as young people call it. But we use a barber to come in and highlight our services because we want the deceased person to look casket sharp. That just means we want them to be their very best and on this presentation, or look their very best for the last presentation. Kinda like, they're like stars. You don't know, as a funeral director, I know how they come in the door. But as loved ones and family, you don't always see that opportunity. What you see is what I present. And what I present is the best work that I can when a deceased person is laying in state for a visitation or a funeral. And that's kind of pretty much the life or the time span that of a funeral director. If a deceased person is in the funeral home for about 7 days, you only actually deal with the deceased person for 2.5 hours to like 3.5 hours. And then the rest of that time, the deceased person is laying in the back, comfortable, waiting for their appointed time to be seen in presentation. And the rest of the time, you're working with the family. Something like I said earlier, sometimes the family has never arranged a funeral at all, so you have to walk them all the way through each step, and it can be kind of boggling for a family that have never dealt with death before. It can be kind of tough, but you have to always have a positive attitude. A positive attitude can help you in a negative situation or in a positive situation. But at this time, I have questions.
I do have a question. Restorative art, you touched on that. What is that?
So restorative art is, it's what cosmetology is. So a person would, let's say if they had a motorcycle accident and their face was kind of like crushed or, what'd you say?
Disfigured.
Yeah, disfigured. Then I, as a funeral director, has training to be able to. So one of the classes that we do in school is called restorative art, and in there we actually make a bust of an individual. So you have to, in anatomy and physiology, you have to learn all of the bones, the cranial structure is what I'm talking about in this example. So I would learn all the cranial structure for a person's head, and then when they're there, I have to work with the remains of what's left of the deceased person. And then I also ask the family for a photo. And then I use this photo and I take my time and I restore the person back to its original state of what this photo looks like. Now, it may be a substantial amount of trauma caused to them depending on what happened. But some of the experiences that I've had to do in my career, I had to like restore a person's like skull. It was like crushed in, concaved in. Sometimes the limbs are cut off a deceased person. You have to reattach them. Sometimes I've experienced the head was decapitated. You have to put the head back, recapitate the head back onto the body if it's possible. But pretty much restorative art is there's going to be some type of trauma that goes on to the deceased person's body, and you're going to have to. There's going to be either an open wound or a crushed wound, and you're going to use your skills to put it back together. Go ahead.
Okay, so what made you choose this career?
So when I was a kid, and this is going live for real, but when I was a kid, I used to be in Mississippi, and in front of our family home, where there was a funeral home there, and I used to see people going in and out of this funeral home, and I used to sit on the porch with all my family, or my younger cousins, and I seen hearses. I've been different all of my life, so I can tell at this place they were doing something that was very important. So one of my uncles died, and I went there and I seen how he looked when he died, and then when I got to the funeral home, he looked totally different. And whatever the funeral home did to him impressed me to the point, because he had a twin, and I kept asking his twin, how did he get out of the casket? So that let me know that whatever they're doing over here, they're doing a good job, and the work that they're producing is rewarded. So ever since then, the lady, her name is Miss Williams, they had hearses, some nice hearses. Another man named was Etheridge Bilbo Hampton. He dressed really well. He drove nice cars, and he kind of like helped me out to gave me some insight of what really goes on in the funeral business, and I just liked it. I like working with people. I really like working with the deceased person as far as like embalming, preparing them for their show. And when I say their show is the visitation or the funeral service. So I like helping them, and then I also like helping people. So like I said, families never dealt with this before. So I like walking them through that process. It's very rewarding. Got great pay. There's benefits to it. This isn't something that you'll get into for money. I'll get right with you. This isn't a career that you will get into just to make money. You actually have to have a passion for it, because some of the things that you see can be emotionally or psychologically disturbing. And you just have to make sure that your mind is solid to be able to deal with some of the things that you encounter. Yeah. Go ahead. You have a question?
What do you like most about your career? What do you like most? And what do you like the least?
The most, I like working with the community. I also like working with, like I said, preparing the deceased person. Some of the opportunities that I've had has been really bad, and then to actually see the final product, it's kind of like building a house. You know what I'm saying? Like it starts in raw materials. That would be the deceased person when we bring them in from the transfer, and then we assess them, and then just like in raw materials, building a house, you gather all the materials, you get a blueprint or a plan together, and then you build a house. And then at the end of the day, you seen what was laid out on the ground, which was nothing, and now you have this nice structure here. Well, I compare that to like the deceased person, because we receive them, they can be in a bad shape, and then we assess them. We go through this process to figure out how we can make them better or look the best that they can.
Presentable. Basically presentable.
Yeah, presentable. And then at the end of the day, when we get to the funeral or the visitation, the family comes in, they do what is called a first viewing, and they spend time with their loved one, and you listen to their comments. They say things that let you know if you've done great work or bad work, and it's always been rewarded to me. So that's one of the things I really like about my job.
What do you like the least?
One of the things that I like the least probably would be, there's a substantial amount of paperwork. I don't like paperwork.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Okay.
I went to Rufus King.
Did you ever cremate anybody?
Yes, that's a good question that you're asking. Cremation is on the rise. When I started funeral business, I think cremation was probably somewhere about 13% of the business. And I think now it's like at 41 or 45%. So cremation has really creeped into the business as far as an option for a loved one's final disposition. Cremation is cool. I have cremated persons before. There's different options, so let me give you some insight on that. Sometimes when a person you can use cremation as a final disposition. So that means instead of going to the cemetery, you can be cremated. But you have to keep in mind, if you're going to be cremated, you also can still have a funeral. And this is some of the things or option that some families don't know that they can do. They just think that their loved one has to be directly cremated. But you can have a full funeral, and then at the end of the funeral, you can choose cremation as your final disposition. And then cremation is fun because you get to. It's fun from this standpoint that you can create an urn or the container that they will rest in for the duration of time. it could be personalized. So recently, one of my cousins died. His name was Christopher Wells, and he liked it, the Green Bay Packers. So for his family, I created a Vince Lombardi trophy for him as his
That
urn.
was dope.
That's hard.
Yeah.
That's
So
dope.
things like that is memorable to the families. You have another question?
What happens when, someone transitions and they don't have family? How does that happen? How does their burial, how does their rites of passage take place?
So sometimes so that's a good question too. So here in the state of Wisconsin, there is what you call Title 19 or general assistance. If no one steps up to claim the deceased person to take care of their funeral arrangements, the state will get involved. They'll work with the funeral home as far as like there's money allotted out every year for deceased persons that are gonna go unclaimed. That's what this is called. So the state will get involved, they'll work with the funeral home. There's a certain amount of time that we have to wait to make sure no one comes and claim the deceased, and then we will go ahead and the state will do a proper burial. Mhm.
Okay, one last question.
Okay.
For like when, let's say if the person, let's say that when they went deceased, how would you, and like, the people who don't have money, like, how would they go about it? Like, how would,
Financial assistance?
yeah.
So as far as like, if the person don't have any money, you can go down to 12th and Valete to the social services building. And again, in there, they have two programs. One is called General Assistance, and then another one is called Title 19. And Title 19 will give you $1,500 towards the funeral expenses, and then $1,000 towards the cemetery. And then if you don't qualify for Title 19, it's General Assistance, and I think they just give each place $500. Don't quote me on that. But the state has an allotted fund set aside for families who are indigent and need assistance with being buried. And then, so there's an allotment. So they'll give you $1,500, let's just say. And then there's you can't go over, I think, $3,500. So you can't charge the family more than $2,000 on top of that. And all the funeral homes, some funeral homes have payment plans, some don't have payment plans, some try and work with you, others try and take a consensus of like what's your budget, and just be honest. It's good when you're in this type of situation or when you're pressed with this opportunity. When you go in a funeral home and it comes to the financial portion, just be honest with the funeral director as to what's going on. If you have a job, if you don't have a job, if you can't pay, so that they can make the best decisions on how to help you financially. As a funeral director, when we go in a selection room, it's called a casket selection room. I can't guide you or direct you to any casket, but let's just say if the room is set up and one side is Chevys and the other side is Cadillacs and then everything in between. I don't know what your personal finances is, and I don't know what you're working with. I only can take you into this room. That's how we're trained, to take you into the room and explain to you what's going on in the room, which is caskets and how the price list works. And then you as a human, you kind of already come in knowing how much money you want to spend, if you have a budget that you want to work with. Some families have life insurance, and they already know, they've been preparing for this. So then I just take them in a room and kind of give them some guidance. And if you choose a Cadillac or you choose a Chevy, then I just come back, I go over your selections with you. I'll let you know what you have selected. And then we write up what is called a bill of statements or a bill of statements of goods and services. And from there, most funeral contracts are paid 48 hours before the start of the service.
What was your hardest accomplishment with the job?
The hardest accomplishment?
Like what you had to sacrifice to get to the base? Like how do you, when you got there, when do you feel like what's the right word to say?
I got arrived.
I don't know what's the right word to say, but like when you got there, when did you realize that this is what you want to do for the rest of your life?
Well, I guess the other option I had was to go and be a plumber.
Whew, I don't know how would you do that. I would stick with the job that you're doing right now.
Yeah. I went to actually. I am licensed to be a plumber. I went through plumbing training. I'm not a master plumber or a journeyman plumber or anything like that, but I have the training. And it's just when you're working with families, and seeing, I don't know, you just got to be in an arrangement conference. It's just like when you pick the deceased person up and you see a certain look on this family's face of how they are hurt, how they are, the emotion that they are going through in this process, and then you take their loved one into your care. You do what you know how to do for them, and then you have a first viewing, and that's the first time they actually see them on presentation, and you can see the smile or some type of rest or peace come upon them. That's rewarding. Then you know, I knew I was doing the right thing. Like, now don't get me wrong, some families I've been talked to in ways that have been very challenging. But I understand that because of the stresses of what they're going through at that particular time, you know? Yeah, so you gotta have a lot of patience in this job, you gotta have a lot of love, you gotta be understanding, and like I said, you can't do it for the money. This is something that you gotta
Do for not even for yourself, but it's more for, like, to keep yourself a bit, to realize how wealthy life is.
It is, because that's a good point. When I was preparing my notes, I thought about that my position working as a funeral director, especially in the embalming room, I've buried family members, I've buried friends that I went to high school with, I buried some of my teachers' children's. As you see different things on a prep table, and when I say things, I'm saying ways that people can die.
Yeah.
It reinforces to you small things like relationships, little things really do count, and time is important, you know? So, like, you know, even if a person is in their 20s or they're young, like there's a lot of youth, like that time is important because you don't know when the clock is gonna end. So you have to, when I'm working, I see young people on the table, I see older people on the table, and it kind of just reinforces to me that I have to take advantage of the choices that I have in life, and life is serious, you know, and in some situations, having a simple conversation can solve a lot of things and stop
Solve major things.
grief. Yeah. But attitude is important. Go ahead.
Yeah, as a funeral director, talk to us about how important it is to talk about this transition period in life. And a lot of people don't talk about when it's time to go, when it's time to leave this plane. Like insurance, right? You talk on insurance. Like, do you see more people with wills and life insurances, or is that helpful moving forward, or moving into this particular transition?
Yeah, it is. It's kind of like car insurance. You know, you got car insurance, and you may never have a car accident, but you got to pay for it. You know, so in relationship to that, a lot of people don't like to talk about death, but one day you're gonna meet it. So you should be prepared. And what I mean by that is, I've seen a lot of families not have life insurance or not put themselves in a position to bury their loved one. So I've learned over the years that, and I try and tell young people, life insurance is important. If you get life insurance before you're 30, you can almost get $200,000-$300,000 for $20 a month for the rest of your life.
You said, wait, what?
Yeah.
One more time for the people in the back.
So I didn't hear what you said.
So you can get a life insurance policy when you're under 20 years. When you're under 30, you can apply for a life insurance policy, and for your loved ones or your surviving relatives, you can put $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 on you, and it's going to be cheaper. You can get that for like $20 to $30. But when you get 30 years old, it goes up, and it goes up dramatically. But the key is this. A lot of people don't tell you this, and this is what I learned. I worked with in the black community, and I worked in the white community. The way you build generational wealth is through life insurance. You have to give, someone's gonna pass away, and you have to be conscious of the next generation. And that's how you build it.
So it's like retirement.
It's a retirement, not necessarily for you, but you're putting Like you're putting if you have children,
I'm good.
if you have a spouse
A mother?
or a mother or anyone,
Girlfriend?
Nope, I ain't got none of that.
You got a friend?
Nope,
Charitable organization,
nope, I ain't got none of that.
so you can always
You got one
grow.
on yourself?
Nope, I ain't got nothing.
That's where you need to start.
Yes.
I ain't got nothing at all, but you trying to go to MSGC.
yeah.
But it sounds like you wanna build. So as a person that would like to build, right, you gotta start from a good foundation. So this is the information to get you to build. If you decide that you wanna have children in the future, that it can win, it can win.
That's your
Or,
legacy.
that's
Your
your legacy.
name dies, I mean, that's your choice,
Right.
but your name dies after you, if you don't got
That's cool
nothing.
with me, y'all. Fuck them kids. I'm sorry, excuse my friends, but fuck them kids. I ain't having any.
we don't relax a little bit.
But as far as like it's not about when you get life insurance. It's not about it's on you, but you're putting another person in a better position. And you may have belongings or houses or cars or whatever possessions that you have that has bills. Life insurance covers those bills, and then whoever your beneficiary is, they should do right by you and use your money to plan a decent funeral for you. And then they're their beneficiary, so whatever's left over is theirs. But a good funeral, you can do a good funeral for anywhere from $5,000 to $8,000. So a $10,000 life insurance policy is not that expensive to have to make sure that you're covering yourself, to make sure that your final expenses is taken care of. Because I'm gonna tell you, to be honest with you, I've seen families get in a hardship because they couldn't pay for their loved one to be buried. And it's not that the funeral home was saying that the price was so high, but they just didn't have money, you know? Like if you're living paycheck to paycheck, when you're pressed with a $5,000 bill for a funeral service and you have to have this money in 7 days, that can become more stressful than dealing with the entire situation that you're in.
Also, it exacerbates the grieving process.
Exactly.
You can't grieve appropriately if you have to, if they're worried, if your family is worried about this $5,000.
Yeah.
So it's not, and then on top of the other pieces as well.
But then also I've learned too that if you have younger people in your family, one person, like there's always one responsible person in the family, but then there's younger people, and I'm not saying they're irresponsible, but they're not thinking about life insurance. It's always good for one person that's responsible to put life insurance on the younger people, on the younger generation. That way, if something happens to them, their funeral expenses is gonna be covered. They're not thinking about that because they're young and they're living their life. But you hang out with your friends, right? And you may hang out with them, but when you pass away, I sit there with your mom, and I never hear from your friends. So
That's facts.
they don't. You have to set yourself up to be in a better position, and you can do that through life insurance.
That was the realest thing I ever heard.
Yeah, any other, this is a great conversation. I don't wanna stop it. It's one of those beautiful things that needs to be talked about more. Any other questions? I can stop it live, I can keep it live going.
I just don't know what the right question to ask him at the moment.
Just ask.
So, there's plenty of questions that I have to ask, I just don't know the right question to ask you.
Long as it's straight.
No, I just don't know the question to ask you at the same time as well, so like I'm trying to think of a question to make the question.
Well, you can be here.
Well, we'll go ahead. We'll go ahead and we'll end the live. Thank you all for being on. Did you want to go ahead and do some additional plugging of
Oh,
where
yeah,
we
I
can
would like,
find you?
Hey,
Twitter
but
handle, Instagram.
yeah, I would just like to. I just want to say that I think that overall in life, you should be conscious of your decisions. I think attitude is everything. Whether you're facing death or life, you should be encouraged, and you should look at things from a positive perspective, even though it's maybe a negative or trying situation before you. How you look at it, attitude is key. And I would just like to thank my employer, Serenity Funeral Home, for entrusting me to be on their staff and to work with them. And if you need any services or anything, they're on Fond du Lac, and we're here to serve. Thank you, and please be encouraged.
Alrighty, thank you all.